Morning, everyone. Welcome to Barnyards and Backyards Live. Really glad you could join us. Today, we're talking about protecting our gardens from the wildlife. But before we get started, I want to do some introductions. We have Rex Lockman with Laramie Conservation District. Good morning, Rex.
Morning.
Thanks so much for joining us. We also have Abby Perry as one of our hosts. She's a UW Extension educator down in Rawlins area. Morning, Abby.
Morning. Good morning.
And then you won't see her, but you might hear her. It's Jenny Thompson. She's behind the Barnyards and Backyards logo. She keeps us on track and keeps all of our connections working. And so we're broadcasting out to Facebook Live. And so Jenny takes care of all that. Always appreciate it, Jenny. I'm Jeremiah Vardaman with UW Extension. We're really glad to have you. Before we get started, if you're first on Zoom, the first time on Zoom, if you just take your mouse across the bottom, there'll be a chat box at the bottom and then a Q&A box. And so if you have questions for our conversation today, put those in the chat box or the Q&A box. Abby and I are watching those, and we're going to bring those forward to Rex as we get through our conversation. And then also on Facebook Live, if you're joining us that way, Jenny Thompson is monitoring that. So if you have some questions, throw those in the comments box there, and she'll bring those to us, and we'll bring those in into our speaker. And with that, I think we'll just get started this morning. Rex, where do you want to begin?
Well, I guess just maybe talking a little bit about the wildlife that we have here in Wyoming.
Well, you need to share your screen, Rex, if you
okay. Let's see.
Unless you just want us to look at you.
Well, that is wildlife, but probably not as fun as this wildlife here. So can you see the screen okay now?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, so yeah, obviously we have a variety of wildlife in Wyoming. And so kind of dependent upon where you're at in the state, you might be dealing with a variety of different critters. Anywhere from the cute and cuddly little rabbits and the, big old grizzly bears up in the northwest part of the state. So, you move out onto an area or whatever, and you might think the wildlife's pretty cute and cuddly and fuzzy, but you start doing a little gardening and they start getting in there and causing issues such as this.
That's what everybody wants to come to Wyoming for, right? Is we enjoy our wildlife, we enjoy our wide open spaces, but even if you live in town, you have to combat quite a bit of this wildlife pressure in on your gardens. Exactly.
So, this can add up pretty quick, and the wildlife can really, take a toll on the garden really fast. And so, trying to figure out what's, I guess ideally, if you're just starting a garden, you might want to take this stuff into consideration beforehand, but need to, I guess first thing you probably want to do is look at and figure out what is causing the problems or what might be causing problems for you in your garden. There's a few different ways that we can do that. Maybe trail cams, going out and setting up trail cam, figure out what's out there, what's getting into the garden. Scat or feces identification. Go out there and, look at the different scat, and you can go on the internet and find all sorts of information on that, and, maybe be able to compare what's going on as far as
Rex, on this photo that you're showing us here with the lettuce, what caused this? I guess to me, this doesn't seem that obvious just through the chew marks. Is that something in particular, or?
So, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. You look at that and, it's almost like maybe the neighbor come and cut the let us off and took it. And you never know. That's where, you know, hiding that trail cam might help you out a little bit. But sometimes, you know, through bite marks on certain things, you can tell what's going on. Like a lot of times a rabbit on a shrub or something will leave a 45-degree angle, and it looks like, you know, just a 45-degree cut right off there. And that's a sign of a rabbit. Or sometimes, you know, if you have squirrels or pocket gophers, they'll do some chewing. On this lettuce here, it's kind of hard to tell, you know, what might be going on. But that's, again, you know, where, you know, maybe a trail camera or something like that, and you never know exactly what you might come up with when you set that trail cam out. So in Wyoming, you never know.
We're always looking for Sasquatch, right?
That's right. That's right.
He's the champion hide and seek guy out there. So you never know.
Exactly.
But I think that's the first step in protecting our gardens, right? We got to know, is it an insect that's chewing on it? Is it a vertebrate pest, right? What's causing the damage to that crop? Maybe, like you said, maybe it's a neighborhood kid sneaking in and grabbing a carrot now and then, right?
Exactly.
But we don't know what to do if we don't know what we're trying to control.
Right, right. And, you know, it may be several different things that you're going to have to do. It may be rabbits, and you may have deer as well. And so, you know, a variety of different things. But probably,
Well, I imagine that tracks can also help, right, Rex, in identifying what might be eating things?
Oh yeah, if you have, you know, wet area or mud or something, and you can see some tracks coming in there, that would be able to help you identify what kind of critters you're dealing with. And again, you probably go to the internet and find all sorts of information on different tracks, and taking pictures of the tracks and being able to identify it. Or if you can take a picture, you know, work with your UW Extension or Conservation District, or even the Wyoming Game and Fish Department might be able to help you identify what's going on in that. With the tracks.
Some good photos. We can really help out folks. And especially, I think Game and Fish is a great resource, especially with the scat and maybe the tracks. A lot of that, as from my experience anyway, you learn that through experience. And unless you've seen that critter or pest before or tracks before, you might not know what that is. And so getting some other advice might help you. Definitely. We got a comment from Facebook. Jody said they're up in the northeast part of Wyoming, and we just built a stockyard type fence, 8 foot tall, woven wire. I'm guessing she put net down, but I'm guessing it's a woven wire to take care of that, to keep elk or deer out of that stack yard up there. Jody, we really appreciate his comment in there.
You bet. Yeah. We'll get into that a little more too here in a little bit. So
Sasquatch, we'll always watch for him, but probably most likely not him in our garden. So what else do we need to worry about?
So I guess kind of focusing on the smaller animals, your squirrels, your rabbits, and pocket gophers is something that, you know, we'll look at, and different ways of helping control these guys. And again, you know, I guess if you're don't have an existing garden, then maybe this will help you design your garden when you're thinking about this stuff beforehand. Or if you do have a garden, some things that can help you in keeping some of these things out. So here we have some raised beds, and obviously that'll can help with, you know, keeping the pocket gophers or squirrels out and tunneling underneath. And kind of depend upon how you build your raised beds. You may be able to put some wire mesh underneath them before you start building them, or if you build them up higher off the ground, obviously, you know, you're not going to have to worry about something coming in from underneath. And then, you know, something like this height probably wouldn't help so much with the rabbits. They'd be able to get right in there, or the squirrels. Something higher would probably help with that. I think on this, this place, they actually, against that wooden fence across the back, they do have mesh wire that is buried down into the ground underneath that to help the keep the critters from coming in or digging underneath the fence.
So we're probably thinking more like maybe a skunk on that, or a rabbit digging underneath that fence, most likely.
Yeah, a skunk or rabbit, or even, you know, if you dig down, you know, 12 inches or so, you're probably even, you know, some of the pocket gophers or ground squirrels are going to deter some of those as well. I know they will go deeper, but it could help deter, you know, if they're digging down through there and they run into some wire mesh underground or something, you know, to keep them from getting through that area.
Basically a physical barrier, just trying to physically keep them out of the presence, right?
Exactly.
We have some comments from Facebook. Linda says that her nemesis are rabbits, ground squirrels, and prairie dogs. So yeah, we feel your pain.
Yep, exactly. And you know, here's some things that, like this chicken wire mesh around this one is definitely going to help, you know, and I think they may have it going all the way underneath as well on this one. And it's tall enough, it's going to keep most of the rabbits out. And I guess I might be a little concerned that, you know, there may be that may be big enough that a squirrel might get through that mesh on that chicken wire in some instances. So, you know, maybe even a smaller opening on that type of a wire.
Well, and some of those, they might have, I'm thinking of actual squirrels, right? Not the ground squirrels that live under the ground and burrow, but if you have squirrels in your yard, they're going to crawl right over top of that, or maybe a raccoon could easily scurry up and over that. So not all, it's that type of fencing is not going to corral or protect against all pests, right? So that's where we got to get back to what you originally started with. We got to know what pests you have in the area and how are we going to try and physically keep them out.
Exactly, Jeremiah. Yep. You know, if you have a tree squirrel and he'd get right into this thing, and you know, you probably have to have something go across the top of it as well.
Well, and the cost, right? So if you'd flip back to that previous slide, you know, we're looking at that big privacy fence, you know, that's quite a bit of material. And if you're fencing off a big area, that gets pretty pricey in a hurry. But the next picture you were just showing, that's maybe a more cheaper way to do for smaller areas or smaller. If you just had a raised bed or two, you don't have to fence off the whole landscape, right? You could easily make that a little more adjustable to a size scale, maybe. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You know, I guess it's dependent upon how big of a garden do you really want, and what you're dealing with, and you know, and some things they might,
right?
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes I think about my prized possessions, the things that I absolutely do not want them to touch, and then the things that, okay, I guess if they get into it, it'll be all right. But, you know, sometimes it's just about fencing off the thing that I care most dearly about.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
A priority list. That's, yeah. So, Rex, on this picture here, do I need to look for a certain size of fencing or strength of fencing to put up, or is chicken wire just good enough? Oh, you muted, Rex.
You hear me okay now?
Yep.
Okay. Again, you know, Jeremiah, it goes back to probably what kind of animals you're dealing with and trying to keep out. Something like this in the picture, the chicken wire would probably work for rabbits and stuff, but when you start dealing with deer or something trying to get in there, then you're probably going to have to get a little stronger type fence materials. And here we can probably go. So I guess on this one, I was just trying to show another way, instead of maybe burying the fence, is actually coming down, and then when you hit the ground with the fence, take your woven wire, whatever, out to the side a foot, and lay it right on top of the ground. And this I've found is pretty good deterrent to keep a lot of critters from trying to bury underneath the fence that you have there.
So that might work pretty good, like on an established fence, I guess is what I think of when we're talking about this. If I already have a fence in place and I don't want to dig that up and put the effort into the ground, I might be able to lay it on the ground, right?
Right,
Okay.
yeah. And so that would, help with rabbits and anything trying to dig underneath it. It's worked pretty good.
Well, and on that fencing, I think the point, you correct me if I'm wrong, Rex, but the point of burying that fence or laying it on the ground surface is for those animals that are going to try and squeeze under the fence. So those smaller animals, a skunk, a raccoon, a rabbit, the pocket gophers, that they're trying to go under the fence or burrowing under the fence.
Right. Yep.
And that is a physical barrier again to keep them from doing that, from that union of a fence to the ground. But I think the other side we didn't mention is the size of hole really needs to be appropriate for the size of the animal. You kind of mentioned it before. I think if you get those big squares that are maybe 4 inches by 4 inches, a rabbit can squeeze right through those, or, and might get down in that, like you're saying, that chicken wire where it's a little bit smaller hole, harder for them just to squeeze through. I've also seen some, like in catalogs or online, they're really pushing like a plastic woven wire fence, but it's all made out of a polyplastic for wildlife. And at least my experience, limited experience with it, is our rabbits and gophers and everything just chew right through the plastic and make their own little exit and entrance holes. And it's not all that useful.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jeremiah. I don't think that plastic stuff would probably, especially in Wyoming with our UV, and then also, the cold weather, that cold weather breaks that plastic stuff down pretty good.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's a good point. All right, so what's next? What's our other alternative?
So besides fencing, for these smaller critters, let's see. So here's another option, a raptor perch, to help encourage hawks or owls or those type of raptors to come in and help with the population of rabbits and ground squirrels and even pocket gophers to an extent. And so these can usually be put up in a yard pretty easy, and it gives the hawk or whatever a place to perch, and then they can sit there and watch for any of these squirrels or whatever running around on the ground and give them easier access to it. Now, you do want to use caution if you have cats or smaller dogs running around, then those hawks will go after cats and smaller dogs sometimes. So use caution if you're using this and have some of those around. And even if you have some eagles around and have some small kids around, that could be an issue as well. I know we've had some people that actually had hawk dive bomb them right out in their front yard because they'd set up a nest in the tree out front, and they had some issues with that. So, but it can be very effective in controlling some of the rodent populations. I know we use it on some tree row type projects and have had really good success with them.
I think the presence of those predator birds are also beneficial towards certain types of birds. So I think in your picture, I believe that is a vineyard behind there, a grape vineyard. And so trying to deter more birds from coming into an area, I think they can do that. Specifically owls is what I see. Pigeons and that. The other side of those raptor perches that I can think of is you want to put that post somewhere where you don't mind the whitewash being, because every time those birds leave, right, they're gonna defecate before they take flight. And so you can have some whitewashing from that defecation down the post or on the ground around it. So you don't want it probably right up next to something you cherish or care about, like your picnic table or your house or whatnot.
Oh yeah, that's a very good point, Jeremiah. Yep. So
What's next?
well, on these small, thinking of pocket gophers and squirrels and things like that, you can use some poison. I wouldn't recommend necessarily using the poison in the garden area for sure. You don't want, that poison getting into the roots or whatever on your vegetables, things like that. But if you have the pocket gophers starting to get into, coming in closer to your garden area, you can poison them and control them outside the garden area before they start getting closer into your garden area. So that is an option. There's, variety of different ones out there that you can use. On the poisons, they can cause secondary poisoning sometimes. And so, pay attention to that. For example, if, a pocket gopher got into a poison and then died up on the ground and then your cat got the pocket gopher, sometimes that can cause secondary poisoning. So make sure anytime you're using any of that, read all the instructions and labels very carefully. A lot of times those poisons can be contradicted by a vet with just basic vitamin K shot. But again, read the directions and warnings and all the label on those type of things when you're using those. And then there are, you see a lot of deterrents and sprays, those type of things out there. Some of them are just really, like spices or capsaicin that they spray on plants to deter these critters from eating the plants. Those type of things are usually more for ornamental type stuff. I guess unless you like spicy lettuce or something like that, then I would recommend not using it on edible type fruits. Same with they have like fox urine or things like that you can spray. You might be able to spray that around the edge of your garden to help deter some of those animals coming into the garden. But usually those things don't last very long. They're pretty short-lived. You get some rain or whatever, and it's going to wash it away, and so you would end up applying those quite often. Then trapping for some of these smaller animals, either you can use kill traps or live traps. And I know that sometimes like a weed and pest or the local game and fish office will rent out live traps. But anytime you're doing any type of trapping of any of these, you want to contact the game and fish and see because some of these animals do have regulations on them, and see what type of regulations there are for animals in your area. And then, take into consideration, okay, you live trapped it. Oh, now what am I going to do with it? Go dump it in the neighbor's garage? Well, they may not be too happy about that. So think about that.
Sorry, Rex. I was going to say, we thought that we had a rabbit in our yard and put out a live trap and ended up with a skunk. So yeah, just to reiterate your point that it's important to first be able to identify what you have in your yard, like you were saying at the beginning of what's coming in, but then having a plan of what you do next. Our community also, you can rent traps from the animal control and they'll come and pick them up. So that might be an option for people in communities too.
Yeah, well, and I bet that was a good story on how you guys got to deal with that skunk, huh?
Yes.
It's a different looking kitty in that trap.
Right.
So if anybody does run into that, I figured out doing some swift fox trapping years ago, like I won't date myself, but quite a few years ago. And when you do get a skunk in the trap, you can use a big tarp or something and come up to the trap with that tarp and then wrap that tarp over the top of the trap and then deal with them that way. But it is still a sneaky process. So
Well, and when you're trapping, the difficulty with trapping, there's a skill and an art to trapping. It's not a matter of just setting that out, depending on what you're going after and what type of trap. And then, as Abby pointed out, you might catch something that you weren't aware of or weren't intending to trap. We've set out a trap specifically for skunks. They were coming into our chicken coop, and we ended up catching the neighbor's cats. And so you just got to kind of be prepared with that trap, and it's a good idea, but there's a skill and an art to catch what you're wanting to catch and not having cause and damage to anything surrounding, especially if you're going into the lethal traps, right? We don't want to harm the neighbor's cat or anything that way, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah, be very careful, and even your dogs or whatever, if you're using a lethal type trap, definitely make sure you know what you're doing and paying attention.
Well, and the same with that poison, right, that you mentioned. I did just thought of it now. You talked really good about that secondary contamination with that poison, but even if you're putting some poison or bait out there, you don't want your pets getting into it or your children getting into it. So making sure that stuff is also in an appropriate manner and protected. Read those labels, but keeping it there out of reach of those animals or individuals we want to protect.
Exactly. Yep.
What's next, Rex?
Well, I guess, I think we've covered the smaller animals pretty good, and maybe get into some of the bigger animals. See, so here we can see a really big fence around the backside and the sides all the way around this place. It's not so much a garden, but maybe a grape orchard or apple orchard, something like that. And you can see that these fences are, I'm guessing that's probably an 8 to 10 foot tall fence, and keeping deer or elk, those type of animals out. And this, if you have, something that's very valuable, this can be pretty expensive in installing these. So, but this is, if you're dealing with those kind of animals, this may be something that you have to come to deal with them.
So that's probably for a larger area like orchards and that, where we don't have that small confined garden, but also a bigger pest that we have to deal with.
Right. Yeah. And I guess depending upon where you're at, and what you're dealing with, you may want to, kind of put something like that around your whole yard or whatever, if you have ornamental trees and stuff that you don't want the deer or elk coming in and even rubbing their antlers on or causing havoc and causing problems around your yard. So the Wyoming Game and Fish has some, pretty good information and fencing guidelines for wildlife, and give information on how to build these type of fences. Again, you can imagine what the cost could be on something like this, but I guess, how much you want to protect your area, it may be worth it.
Yeah, I think that last picture was a image of just some fruit trees that were just planted in an orchard. I put in a fence like this at the Sheridan R&E Center around a vineyard. It was an acre in size, and we had deer and antelope there. And so we had to go with a 6 foot tall woven wire fence, and it was big. It was stout, a lot of materials. It was expensive.
Oh yeah.
But we've never had a problem in that vineyard there with those pests anyway. So yeah. It's worth it. It's worth it if you can afford it, I should say. And so you gotta keep your hopes and dreams in perspective with your budget, essentially, of how you want to do this. And I think Abby's comments of, prioritize what's the most important to you and what can you afford to protect. So yeah. Yep. Jenny just dropped a link in the chat box for everyone. It's a Game and Fish publication on fencing out larger wildlife, how to do it, how to build those specifications for those fence. So take a look at that link there to help you out. Great, Rex, what's next?
So we got another fence design that is kind of a double fence close together. And you wouldn't have to go as tall with this. A lot of times they say that deer or even probably elk, you have two fences pretty close together. You could probably even, this one is showing, I do believe, a little more of electric fence, but even if you did just a woven wire fences, two of them close together, their depth perception, it kind of freaks them out and they don't want to jump it and get caught in between two fence lines really close together. And so they say these can be as effective as well. And it may be, you know, the price would probably still be kind of costly, but it may be a little easier to manage than managing big 10-foot long posts. So this would be another option. And then again, you could do electric fence on something like this. The electric fence, you may want to, you know, put some, when you first install it, is put some flagging on the electric fence so that they kind of notice it. And once they touch it, usually they respect it pretty good. But on any electric fence, sometimes in our really dry climate, the way they work is that the animal is actually grounded through the soil, and once they touch the wire, it completes the circuit. But due to lack of moisture in our soils, sometimes it doesn't work so well. And so there's some, you know, different options you can use to make it a little more effective that way. The other thing is if you have weeds or something growing up along the fence, they can actually short out the fence and make it ineffective.
And basically that electric on that fence is what's keeping the control, right? If you don't have that current working real well, like you're saying, it grounds out, or that, animals don't tend to respect it because it's just a cold wire, basically.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
So how, you said this double fence, and we don't want to get into too many specifications. I think people can look up that publication, but in this example, how far apart is that double fence?
So this one is designed at basically 3 feet apart. And
okay.
so you'd have 3 foot space in between the two fence lines there. And that's, you know, pretty close together. And from outside looking in, you know, if you're deer, elks, or antelope, something like that, they would, you know, look at that, and that's quite a way to jump that 3 feet to complete both fences. And usually they need quite a bit of space, you know, to jump it and get over a fence. And so that other one being so close together would deter them.
And this is obviously for big animals, like you said, right?
Right.
Because rabbits and that are just going to go right underneath. There's no woven wire to keep them out or any physical barrier for them.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
But you could also probably layer these, right? Like that woven fence you showed before, and you could have a shorter fence, I guess what I'm thinking, and then have electric fence 3 feet out or something.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You know, you could probably put some on this interior one, put some of your woven wire on the interior part of it to deter the smaller animals, and then just have that other one, an electric fence on the outside, to deter the deer and elk and Sasquatch or something like that.
Yeah. Abby, I think I cut you off. What were you trying to say?
Well, and I was going to say the idea is that they'd also approach the taller fence first, right? So they approach the tall one, and then the shorter one would be the second fence that they get to. I don't know if we.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. So that taller fence would be the outside fence. And then the shorter side would be on the interior towards your garden area you're trying to protect.
And I think what's nice about this fencing for some others is that you also get the aesthetic of it. You get to see what's being protected still. With some of our other fences that can be solid, you don't end up getting to sort of appreciate the garden from the kitchen window or whatever. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that aesthetic value. Some people care, right? They we moved here for the open space, and so I don't want to wall myself in with a privacy fence or that woven fence that kind of obstructs the view. This might be a
Right.
little bit more visible of a fence to view through, but still have that physical barrier. Yeah, we got a question, Rex, and this is a great question. Teresa asked, would the double fencing work for moose as well?
Oh boy, that is a good question. You know, I don't know for sure. I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that. I would guess, you know, the moose, where this one is only 48 inches tall on that outside, I would, if you put it taller and maybe went with like 6 foot on the outside, and you know, then a 4 foot or something like that on the inside, it might be effective. I guess I would probably contact the Game and Fish. They would probably have a lot better idea before you spend all the money to put something like this in, and then the moose just jumps right over the top of it, and you waste, you know, all that money you spent's basically useless. So
yeah, the moose don't really jump real well. They're not like mule deer or those that jump real good, but they tend, and I don't know, they're just big and they can wade through all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I'm not sure this one would do it, but if you did a combination of a woven wire fence and electric, might deter moose. But again, I think that's the best recommendation. Look at that publication from Game and Fish and go talk to them before you really settle in on an idea. I think electric can work as long as it's really strong. I know moose have a really thick hide, and so they probably have to have a pretty strong electric fence to deter them. We have another question. Does electric fencing deter raccoons?
Boy, I think I could see possibly it working for them, but I guess my concern would be you would have to have it so low down on the ground, you know, and maybe some of like that. I know they have like a mesh wire fencing that they use for goats sometimes.
Yep.
And something like that possibly would work. Again, you know, you would really have to keep the vegetation cleared out of it so that the vegetation isn't shorting on it.
Yep. I think it's an option, but I think it's kind of a combination of, you got to have that woven wire fence so that raccoon can't walk straight under the wire, can't go that direction. But then I've heard of people putting that an electric fence like 6 inches off of that woven wire fence.
Oh yeah.
And close to the ground. So that raccoon has to reach up and grab a hold of it. It might be 18 inches, maybe 2 foot off the ground, but that raccoon has to be in contact with the ground to make it short, right? Or to complete that circuit. So I've heard it's effective, but it's getting it just right so it does work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Making them feel it, and I don't know, maybe put some peanut butter on the electric fence and
let them lick it. Yep, I think so. And just knowing those animals, so like antelope in particular, antelope generally don't jump fences. I've seen them jump fence, but they tend to favor to go under that fence. And so it like this woven wire, or excuse me, this electric fence, we're going to have it a little bit closer to the ground for antelope versus deer, so to speak. So we got to adjust to the animal we're trying to protect.
Exactly. Yeah. So
I think, Jenny just threw a publication or a resource into the chat box for everybody on raccoons specifically. So there might be a good idea in there for raccoons. The other thing to think about, and we didn't mention with these fences, are different styles and types of fences are going to add other values. So for instance, putting up a privacy fence or a solid fence, you might have some benefit of a windbreak in addition to physically keeping out animals out of your garden. Also, you might have shading, right? So that might be a negative to our garden. That fence might add some shading, or maybe you want shading, but you got to think through that all, not just as the deterrent. So great. What's next, Rex? Have we covered that topic?
Well, yeah, I guess go into deterrence a little bit. As far as deterrence, there's always the scarecrow, but I think a lot of animals will get used to that pretty darn quick. I've heard of people using flashy things that will blow in the wind, and some old CDs or whatever, and tie them on a string or whatever, and put them out there. I don't, I think a lot of those type of things will work in the beginning. After a while, I think will get used to them. Then, I've seen the motion activated sprinklers that advertised and stuff. I don't have any personal experience with them. I guess I would think those would work pretty good, but I'm not sure. I don't know if you guys had or heard any good about those.
Not about those. I've heard good things about like the sonic sound wave type things being effective, but I also don't have any sort of personal experience with that. But I've heard good things, specifically with deer, I think is what they were trying to deter.
We use those sonic boxes for rabbits, and they work pretty well. Yeah, I haven't had any personal experience with those motion sprinklers. I kind of wonder about them.
Yeah.
I think the tough part is where do you need to set that sprinkler up, right?
Yeah.
And can you cover all the area that animal's going to go through? And generally, when we're talking about like a garden in particular, we don't want overhead irrigation. And so really, it might work in an orchard type setting or along a flower bed or something there. But having that water sprinkler over our garden may cause us to have some disease issues. If we can set it for short bursts or short time, you'd have to read the label. It has a possibility, but I think it goes back to your earlier comment. It's very possible that the animals might get used to it over time. At least from my personal experience, the physical barriers are more effective. They cost more, but you tend to have better results with that than you do like what you're talking about, the CDs, the scarecrow. There's some that are like a blow up balloon that looks like a big eye for bird control. They get used to it over time, especially if it's in the same location the whole time. But I don't know. It'd be really interesting if anybody's used one of those automatic sprinkler systems or those motion detected ones, if they would work.
Yeah. Yep. So
what's next?
Let's see. Probably going into birds a little bit. Keeping birds out of areas, and about going back to the raptor perch, as you'd mentioned, Jeremiah, keeping some of the birds out with just a raptor hanging around a little bit more is a possibility. And then obviously, netting, putting netting like this over the top of your fruit trees, or even, over the top of your garden. And, these type of things here, keeping the birds out. And, they probably deter some other animals as well to a degree. Again, some of that plastic netting type stuff would probably work fine for birds, but some of those other animals would, I suspect, probably chew right through some of that netting. Again, we've had issues with hail in our garden, and so I've been contemplating actually getting a heavier metal mesh to put over the top of the garden, and which would help, protect it from the birds, as well as hopefully, helping give it some protection from hail damage.
Yeah, we have a comment from Facebook from Barb who said something was eating the melons, and they made hoops like this out of PVC over theirs and used chicken wire instead of the bird netting. And so, getting to something metal that they won't chew through, that's a great idea.
You bet.
We found this sort of setup to be pretty effective for deer, but they can also kind of use their heads and flip up some of that netting. So like making sure that it's secure around all sides. I think it can be effective for more than one animal at a time, but
Well, and the other issue is you have to make it accessible, right? You got to get in there
Right.
and bend it. So it can't be rigid and permanent. So you got to have ways of removing it to get in there. And at least specifically with the bird netting, you showed that picture of that cherry tree, I think it was. That bird netting, when you're doing trees or fruits, you know, so strawberries or grapes, currants, you know, any of those, we only need to put that bird netting on once the fruit's starting to set. And so specifically in grapes, I know we can have berries on the tree, but they're green, they're hard, they're not desirable. But once they start turning color, that's when they start setting sugars, and that's when they become desirable. So that's when we need to net them. So we don't have to have that bird net on it year round or anything that way. And it's actually a pain in the butt because you put that bird netting on and plants start growing through it. Man, then to try and get that bird netting off is so hard without damaging the tree or the shrub or knocking off fruit. So you got to have access to it as well.
Yeah, and I imagine the Wyoming wind could really wreak havoc on some of this as well.
Yeah, definitely anchor it down. Yeah, that bird netting is light and it'll blow away. Yep, I agree. Jenny put a comment in the chat box, but I just want to make sure I reiterate it for Facebook folks. Getting back to the raccoons. Raccoons are sensitive to electric shock. An ordinary fence can be made raccoon proof, and then adding a single electric strand of wire 8 inches above the ground and about 8 inches out from the base is kind of the ideal setting for raccoons. So electric fence is appropriate for raccoons, but you need to have that other raccoon proof fencing first to make that wire effective.
Yeah.
Great. Sorry, I didn't mean to deter us. What we're talking about netting that, what else, Rex?
So let's see, we go to this one, and this covering for like fruit trees and stuff, and then you can use it over the garden as well, can help with the deterring birds and probably other animals as well. Yep. And keeping them out.
That row covering would be really, really good. We have a question, and this really talks to it, but a question for Abby. Abby, you mentioned the netting. Would Abby's netting keep out grasshoppers too?
I think that like a grasshopper could probably go through the hole, but I don't think that they can like maneuver their bodies with as much precision. I'm not really sure, like in the flying and hopping part of it, but they could get through the size of the hole. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep. I think this row covering would be more appropriate to keep grasshoppers out. It's an actual physical barrier. If you can find some mesh netting that has small enough holes where they won't crawl through it, but those real tiny grasshoppers, you'd need some really, it almost need to be like screen cover for like a screen door to keep them out. But this row cover would work really, really good. But again, like Rex's comments, you want to secure this to the ground or secure it in some fashion because our winds will take it to Nebraska in a hurry.
Oh yeah. Yeah. This could really take off pretty easy, I'd imagine. And then, you know, if you have raccoons or something like that getting into the area, you can see causing a hole in this one here.
Just being nosy.
Yep.
Well, and you probably could have that buck deer again, right? Come in with his antlers and punch a hole in it or drag the whole netting off. Unfortunately, there's not a one size fits all kind of combination with this. And a lot of times you got to do multiple fashions, right? You got to have different control measures. It's tough.
Yep, it is. It is. So I guess the last one to cover, well, I guess we, you know, just some, here's what a fruit tree, I think it looks like to me a chokecherry tree, but just something to keep the rabbits from chewing on the trees there, you know, some basic wire mesh type things around the base. I know that even around here, we've had some issues with deer or antelope rubbing their antlers or horns on the trees. And so, a bigger, especially these, smaller type trees. And so it may be a little bit bigger cage around the tree than this, but this would be, something that would deter rabbits from chewing on the bark of these trees, especially in the winter. We've had damage on choke cherries and things like that, where squirrels or, ground squirrels or rabbits chewing on the bark of the tree and causing damage to the trees.
Yeah, especially pocket gophers. I've even noticed like people will mulch around their trees, and those pocket gophers will go in the winter time, will go under that mulch. And if that mulch is right up to that tree base, they'll just chew right there and girdle around that tree. So,
oh yeah, causing problems.
And something else to think about, especially with the fruit trees, is in the winter time, our vegetable gardens, we're probably not worrying about in the winter, but with our trees in the winter, when the snow piles and drifts, making sure that whatever we're trying to keep out is still kept out and not just climbing over those drifts and chewing on whatever you're trying to keep them from chewing on.
So what you're saying is that drift can bury that little like mesh screen, and then now they have access to it where they didn't in the summer?
Exactly.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that right. Very good point. That's brutal.
Yeah.
So what do we got here? A bunch of forks? Is it?
Yeah. That poor plant feels like it's being stocked up on by those forks and gonna get eaten, huh? So this one is actually one that somebody used this to keep the neighbor's cat out of, I think those are tomatoes. I'm not positive, I guess.
I think so.
And keeping their neighbor's cat out of there. I don't know if the neighbor's cat was necessarily eating on the plant or doing some other things and burying treasures in there for them.
I would imagine probably just burying treasures, a nice little litter box there that they can
use. Yep, exactly.
That's a pretty inventive way of a deterrent.
Yeah.
Well, but that's a good point. Sometimes our pesky problem in our gardens or our landscape is not wildlife. It's the neighborhood dog or the neighborhood cat getting in. But some of these physical deterrents can also prevent them, like good fencing. But cats are a problem. And this is interesting. I've never heard of this one before. That's a funny picture.
Yeah. I haven't seen it either. So, but that's basically what I had for slides to share. But there's a lot of different ways to protect your garden from a lot of different animals. And I will have to say though that I do have a silver bullet.
What's that?
If you finally give up, there is a silver bullet that will take care of all this, and it's going to the grocery store. But of course that isn't as tasty and not as fun for a lot of people, I know. So, but there is a true silver bullet.
But that's the issue, right? Is we're planting a nice food habitat for those critters and attract them into our yard. I'm up here in the northwest part of Wyoming, and we do have grizzly bears. And so anytime people call about fruit trees or gardens or that, we got to know where they're at, because you could be bringing in grizzly bears, and that's the last thing you want to find when you step out your front door, and being aware of that. But not attracting them to begin with helps.
Yeah, you may not be necessarily so worried about your garden, but yourself and attracting animals in for your that might harm you. Yeah,
right. We had a couple comments from Facebook. I got to find them here. Give me a second. I believe it was Jody mentioned that they put bird netting over their sweet corn to protect it from the birds again. And I guess we didn't. You can use bird netting in all different types. So it can go over the garden or over the raised bed like we showed, over fruit trees and that. There's actually a permanent, it's so a lot of times bird netting is like a plastic mesh that's made. There is actually a permanent, or a more permanent, I should say, bird netting that is cords, that's made out of nylon cords and that, and tied together. It's more expensive, right? And it's bigger, but I have actually seen people where they will net their entire garden.
Wow.
They'll put up the woven wire fence on the side, and then they'll net the garden over top. Vineyards, actually, I mean, and we're talking huge. This is bird netting like they use in bird farms, but they'll stretch bird netting over an entire acre of vineyard or that. But it is expensive. It gets, and sometimes if you can take it down during the winter so the snow load doesn't crush it down, would help. But it is kind of meant more as permanent. So thank you for the comment, Jody. Great idea. The last one that came in is Linda says that she takes 1 liter pop bottles and cuts them lengthwise with the tops cut off, and then wraps those around the trees and stacks them one on top of the other. And it works really well to protect the trunk of a tree. Let's see. I believe it's for deer or from those animals that are going to try and chew on it. So I think they go from the ground up. But thank you for the suggestion, Linda. That's really interesting. What else?
I guess I was going to mention on that is just, I could see, that protecting it that way, but it could possibly cause some extra heat around the tree trunk, and, could possibly cause some issues there. So, definitely keep an eye on that when you're using something like that.
Well, we probably don't want it airtight, right? We probably want it
Right.
to let some of that moisture and condensation to get out. That's a good point. And then over time, you're going to want to remove those, right? We don't want it permanently left there. And I'm thinking as the tree grows in girth, right, we don't want it to get too tight and to restrict the tree growth. So over time, we might have to expand that. But no, good points.
Yeah, a lot of times once those trays are bigger in diameter, animals a lot of times leave them alone too.
Yeah, they have to do a lot more damage to them to actually severely. It's more on the smaller size, smaller diameter. Yeah,
Right.
definitely. Yep. I don't see any other questions or comments. Do you, Abby? Have I missed any?
I don't see any, no. So I guess if anybody has any last minute comments or questions to get in, we'll probably give you a few seconds here.
I don't see any. Why don't you just wrap us up?
All right. So this presentation here with Rex will get posted to the Barnyards and Backyards Live website here that Jenny's gonna pull up for us. So you can see it'll get posted here in this list. You can go back and look at other episodes that have been posted, and I don't know if we've got a schedule up of what's coming next, but if you missed anything from Rex's, you can go and check it out here on the website, and some links. I think that Jenny's going to try and link that game and fish one with fencing that we talked about as well. Oh, and then we do have the what's coming up next, and it looks like some forested topics for next week. So that schedule for the rest of the season should be up there. Also on the web, we have just our regular Barnyards and Backyards website with very extensive collection of articles and topics for people to come in and look at. So things specific about wildlife that kind of go along with this topic, but if you've got other questions, then definitely check out all the articles there. Looks like some specific stuff for fencing out wildlife. Thanks for pointing that out, Jenny. And then of course, all of our counties, every county in the state has an extension office. So if you have questions or want to get some of these publications on hand, you can always go in and check out those county offices. And then the last thing is just making sure that we can hear from you. So I think we'll have the link to the evaluations in the Facebook chat box, and then, or Facebook comments, and then here in the chat box. So we'd love to get feedback from all of you. Helps us kind of know where to go next, what direction to take. So if you could fill those out for us, we'd appreciate it.
Awesome. I think that's all we have. Thank you so much, Rex, for joining us. Thanks, Abby. It's been fun. We'll see you guys next time.
All right.
See ya.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Rex.